and welcome back to the Little Woman podcast. Today's comment shout-out goes to Red, who says, I have been recently getting into classic literature, and I thought I was the only one who thought Friedrich was way better than Laurie. All my friends judged it by the 2019 movie without even reading the book, and it's a freaking shame. Their characters deserve so much better. For somebody who never married, Louisa May Alcott thought about marriage a lot. In the 19th century, most people married because of money, and when Louisa was younger, she considered marrying for money, so she could lift her family away from poverty. And Louisa's mother had told her that she would rather see her married to a poor man and to be happy. In Little Woman, it is Amy who considered marrying for money so she can financially help her family. People still today judge Amy for that. Should they actually be judging Louisa May Alcott? I don't know. In Little Woman, Mommy says to the girls that she rather sees them to marry poor men for love than to be rich and miserable. When I read Little Woman 2019 film guide, Greta Gerwig was criticizing the previous Little Woman movies that they put too much emphasis on the romance. And there was a whole sequence in the book where she was making fun of the Under the Umbrella chapter and Joseph Friedrich's relationship. And in the movie she puts way more emphasis on girls wanting to make money and not to care about anything else. And then she wondered why Joe rejected, quote, rich and handsome Laurie. That is a huge contradiction with The Little Woman, the novel, and the entire time period, since Louisa May Alcott encourages young women to marry for love instead of money. And Louisa was not a happy spinster in her diaries from the time when she was in her mid-40s, and she writes how lonely she is and how she envies her sister's marriages. Louisa was making about $2 million a year at that time. That's a lot of money today. She was one of the wealthiest women in America, so money did not make her happy. Not at all. In this episode, Christina and I will be analyzing the different marriages in Little Woman. It does seem that Louisa herself had similar goals when it came to marriage when she was younger. I have often also wondered how much the relationship that she had with real-life Laurie, Lady Wisniewski, affected on her views about marriage, because she did seriously consider marriage with him and thought about their relationship a lot. He was a lot younger and apparently had proposed Louisa's previous employee while wooing Louisa, and I think Louisa had a good reasons to reject him. If you want to hear more about Laddie and Henry, check out the episode Love and Sex in Little Woman. This is a quote from an article that Louisa wrote. Hello and welcome to the Little Woman podcast. Before entering the podcast, I wanted to let you know she wanted to marry herself and envied her sister's romances. If you just show Laurie being in love with Joe and don't give the actual reason why she rejected him, you will never see why Amy and Laurie and Joe and Friedrich's relationships were written to be those that work. Now we have a way lighter views on marriage than it was for Victorians, and getting a divorce was difficult. And Louisa saw lots of very unhappy marriages. They were made because of money, but both of her sisters married for love and it worked out for them. Louisa did pay attention to her sisters' marriages, and she writes how they, quote, blossomed in their marriages. If you ask me, there has not been nearly enough research made about the marriages in Little Woman and how they fit with Louisa's own observations about marriage. I talked with someone in a Henry Thoreau discussion group actually, and they pointed out that there is this quote, pop culture idea in movies what love is, and it's based on these very shallow ideas what romanticized Joe and Laurie represent in the films, whereas the transcendentalist like Louisa May Alcott, they saw love more as a spiritual experience. You know, it doesn't really matter how different or how similar you are with the other person. What really matters is how your differences and similarities complement the other person, and this is something that Louisa May Alcott really mastered, the way she crafted the marriages in Little Woman and many of her other novels too. This Small Umbrella in the Rain, Little Woman podcast, marriages in Little Woman and why they work.
Remember, you said, I'm pretty sure it was you, where you said that Meg and John were the more grounded type, Laurie and Amy are the romantic type, and then Joe and Friedrich somehow are a mix of the two. Like, they're grounded in the sense of like what is the realistic, but like they are deeply romantic with each other, and that it carries on through the years.
One of my friends said that Louise writing all these things to her journals, how she was lonely and envied her sister's marriages and how she wanted to get married. It was not something that she could say to the public if she had this fear that people pity her because she was a spinster. But also that during that time, it would not be something even appropriate to tell that I'm not married because I'm lonely. She was always afraid that she would lose her face. I've been reading this now from a couple of different sources that she paid Daddy Wisniewski some money, that he would not go to the press and chat about their, I don't know if it was affair or a kiss or something more. But I think it's pretty clearly that Louisa was afraid that people would find out that she had affairs with men.
Yeah.
I think it was one of the Alcott studies that I read that Louisa and her publisher, they were the ones who came up with the spinster image so that they could sell her books, especially for the children, because the children were her target audience. Even though nowadays a lot of people see Little Woman more as a young adult novel, or some people even as an adult novel, but back then it was really targeted for children. I don't think Little Woman is necessarily a children's book, because I think it opens up a lot better when you have some years behind you.
Right.
But I think it explains a lot about why people have so many misconceptions about Louisa and marriage. There is a very big difference between this public image that Louisa and her publisher, Thomas Niles, created for her so that they could sell her works. And then there is this private Louisa who had these crushes to her older male friends, and I think she did fall in love to Henry David Thoreau, and she had a fling with Daddy Wisniewski. She was a very passionate woman who did want career and a romance and marriage. I also read the early Alcott schoolers because they didn't really want to make the difference between the two. They cut out all these certain parts about her diaries and didn't include them into the public statements about Louisa May Alcott. It's really interesting when you go back to the Louisa May Alcott research and how in different time periods certain elements have been removed from Louisa May Alcott studies. I think I read that in the 70s, when the 1970 series came out, there was this big anti-Friedrich and anti-Laurie movement in Alcott research because of that series, the way it portrayed Laurie and Friedrich. And I kind of understand that, because I don't think that series does a really good job with portraying the male characters, but then it's also a really shame in terms of the research, if you take this very angry feminist approach to the male characters.
The BBC version you're talking about, right?
Yeah, the one where Friedrich is really angry when he finds out that Joe has been writing sensational stories.
Yeah, that one is a very unusual version. I also remember that they did, like, Mr. March felt a little weird. Like, I was like,
yeah,
like, that doesn't seem right to his character to just kind of be oblivious like that. Because like, the one scene that stands out particularly is when Friedrich comes to visit, and he's like, oh my god, it's you, and like takes him to like the study and just doesn't even realize that, like, oh, maybe Joe wanted to see Friedrich. Like, I was like, that seems so totally not in character with Mr. March. And like, I don't know, it was like, it is a very unusual version. And not to say that the BBC couldn't do a version of Little Women, because obviously they're British and more American, but like, it almost felt at times like it was making fun of it. Like, they kind of had moments where I was just like, I don't know if you're making fun of the story or not. Like, there was something very off about it, which I almost felt as a shame, because it does have some good moments. Like, I think the actress that plays Joe is good. Like, she could have been a really good Joe. She seemed to have that same sort of characteristic, and had a really good Laurie proposal scene. I thought that was actually, again, one of the closest to how the novel plays it out. And you really do kind of sit there like, Laurie, you little jerk, like, just leave her alone. It's tough. And that one, for anyone that doesn't know, because I took the time to do it, that is so far to date the only version that has an actual German Friedrich.
Half German, half English, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to find my thing, the post that I made, because one day I was just so bored. I was like, let me just see how many of them are actual Germans versus, yeah, so I found it. For anyone that is curious, Paul Lucas from the 33 version is Hungarian. Rossano Brazzi from the 49 version is Italian. Then Frederick Jaeger from the 1971 that we're discussing is German. Shatner from 78 two-parter is Canadian. Gabriel Byrne from 1994 is Irish. Mark Stanley from the Masterpiece Theater miniseries is English. Ian Bowen from the modern day one is American, and Louis Garrel is French. I was just curious one day. I was just like, let me just research this, and I gotta say, as unusual as the 1970 version is, it had that going for him, but I was like, that's a shock. Like seriously, only out of all of those, and that's mainstream versions, one of them is the closest to how the book version is, which is very, very bizarre.
Yeah, it's not very loyal to the book. I think they did a really good job with Amy and Laurie in Europe. The dialogue was very close to the book, but then it also had that scene of Laurie catfishing Meg, which also in the book, but then I got so mad because they framed it to be Meg's fault. That was not run today because it was all Laurie's fault.
Right, and it's not fair to say that's Meg's fault when why would she ever suspect that, Laurie would ever do such a thing? Because as harmless as his other tricks before, she probably was just like, whatever. But that was not harmless. That was a very mean thing to do, and that's like the moment where you're kind of like, Laurie, that was very low of you to go that way. But again, I'm not a fan of any version that has an adult playing Amy, and I think as good as she was, like you said, when she's more an adult and they're in Europe, I think that's a good sequence. But as a child, she just, that actress got on my nerves. I couldn't stand listening to her screech that way. So it was the same thing with that Amy in the 1978 version. It just was like, oh my God, just grow up. You are a grown up, so act like it.
You cannot have an adult woman playing a child without making the character looking immature. It happens every time, every single time.
And I do say I give props to the 1949 version that obviously when you look at them, Margaret O'Brien is younger than Elizabeth Taylor. So in that one, they actually switched it to be that Amy is older than Beth. While that is not accurate, I can appreciate that they did try to accommodate it so that way it doesn't look wrong. Like, again, you can't convince me that Margaret O'Brien is older than Elizabeth Taylor. So far, only the 94 version and the 2008 modern day version actually did do a split between child Amy and adult Amy. And it makes Amy so much more sympathetic when you kind of look at her like she's just a little girl. She wants to be with the older sisters, which is something I relate to. I mean, I'm the youngest of four, and my sister is 5 years older than me. So I always kind of had that feeling of like, can I come too? And it's like, no, you're not old enough for this. No, you can't, because, this is something that only, let's just say if I was 10 and she was 15, like, sorry, only teenagers can do this, or you're not old enough for that. Like, so I definitely can identify with Amy of that feeling of, but I want to join too. It's not fair. Like, and you feel bad because you're just like, no, she's just a little kid. But when you do get like an older actress playing the part and doing the whole book burning scene, it doesn't feel as sympathetic to Amy, and you do have that sort of feeling of like, well, Jo's right to be mad at her for as long as she has, because she's an adult and she should know better. Whereas with the little kid, it's like, it was really bad that she did that, but you gotta understand she is a little kid. Be a little bit more forgiving towards her. I don't know why they feel the need to. The only thing I can think of is that they kind of, I'm assuming in general, Hollywood, when they do like cast a older actress to play a younger person to try to carry out is that they think that somehow you're going to lose momentum or you lose something in that. But I'm like, I can't buy, as much as I do like Lily James, I can't buy Lily James being a young Natasha in War and Peace. She's a little bit too mature looking to be a 12-year-old.